All right, we're all set, Shannon. Thank you so much for doing this with me today. I'll introduce myself and then maybe you can tell us a little bit about you. My name is Mary Hall Scott. For those of you that don't know me, I am an independent artist, Permanent Makeup Designs by Mary. I own Micro PMU Tattoo Supply Company, and I am a co-founder of the PMU Collaborative, which is the newest educational adventure, which is amazing. And I'm so excited that you're on our leadership team for that. But it's a 3-month online program followed by a 3 days hands-on training, because we know that hands-on is kind of like the icing on the cake, right? So in participating in all those things and with all the things that I do, it's really important for me to give back, right? It's important for me to help artists, and just to kind of share our knowledge, but share real knowledge, like real scientific based knowledge, not stuff that's out there that you can go into a group and get 40 different answers from 40 different people, right? So that's kind of what I'm all about. I know it's like, oh, your head explodes. So tell them a little bit about you.
Hello, I'm Shannon Kornylo. I own my own PMU studio here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I work on my own as well, and I am on the leadership team for the collab, which is, like Mary mentioned, the 3-month intensive learning process for PMU, everything PMU. And we will be launching some Canadian versions of that next year.
So excited. So excited. I can't wait to get up to Canada, just to see all you guys. I mean, now it's like I feel like I have an extended family across the border, and now I've got to get up there and like meet you guys and see you guys in person. It's so exciting.
Yes. One of the things I have to say, like Mary, you're talking about, like, helping people and giving them really good education and information. Something always sticks in my mind is that song by Tim McGraw, Humble and Kind. And it's always talking about helping the next person in line. So if you can always, help the next person in line, maybe like you were helped, or even if you weren't helped, just still helping them out, it always comes back to you.
I know, right? Like people, it's so funny to me because this industry used to be so competitive, right? Like nobody wanted to give away their secrets. And it's so funny to me because it's like there's so many faces, right? Like we have eyebrows, we have eyeliner, we have lips, like there's so many faces. There's plenty of work for all of us. And the better the work that we all do, the more faces we'll have to do it on, right? Because you mess
That's right.
somebody's face up and they're not referring anybody to you or anybody else. Well, what I wanted to talk about today was pigments, and I want to share the knowledge a little bit about kind of pigments, where they started and where we're at today, because I think even just in the last 5 years, I don't know about you, but there have been so many changes. So I've been doing this for over 10 years, and the last 5 years are mind blowing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
pigments have the circle has it's just completely different.
yeah. Back when I started over 10 years ago, I was actually mixing my own pigments. I had my yellows and my oranges and my blacks. And, the first pigment line that I was introduced to was from my very first trainer. And it was a pigment line that she produced. And I was mixing my own pigments. I thought I knew what I was doing because I knew if I put red and yellow and black together, I got brown. I had no idea about longevity, light fastness. I mean, I had no idea what I was even doing, right? It was so crazy.
Mary the chemist.
Yeah. And I have 30 plus years in medicine, right? Plus a physics degree. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I always thought to myself that if if I didn't know what I was doing, then who really knew, right? Because I thought I was kind of smart anyhow. I don't know.
I never did that. At least I never did that.
Yeah. So then we went into pigments, and the industry just started exploding, right? So it's no different than when I was in the fitness industry. When it starts to explode, everybody jumps in and everybody wants a
Yeah.
piece of the pie. and products start coming out of everywhere, you know, because everybody wants a piece of that pie. So then we went into some early PMU pigments, which, you know, I'm not going to name brands or sources, but, you know, we ended up with a lot of salmon colored eyebrows. I had some nice shades of green out there. So, you know, I thought they were Packer colors. I don't know. You live in Wisconsin, you make it work. But the pigments weren't perfected yet, right? And
No, they weren't.
so we would just look at a bottle and I would say, oh, this is a nice brown. Put a little on your forehead. Oh, that's great. That's great. That'll be great. I don't know. Did you, some of the earlier pigments, did you end up with some nice colors?
Some of the earlier ones, yeah, I didn't have greens, but I had some salmons as well. But thank goodness I feel like I didn't have too much ashy or grayness or oversaturation. I felt salmon was a little easier to work with if that was the case. So
Yeah.
I wasn't too stressed about it, but I definitely had a little bit of salmon-y kind of brows when I first started.
Yeah. So we now know, right? Because we really had inorganic and we had organic. So, you know, the salmony comes from inorganic pigments, right? And I always tell my students, so I can have some dyslexia, like I can very easily turn things around. So for me, in my mind, I always had to remember I is inorganic. So they went together. And then because you could get the orange or the salmon from them, that's warmth, right? So the warm color, I would remember Sedona, Arizona, like it's warm and I love it there. And, you know, you have the orange rocks and the red rocks and it's so beautiful. So that's how I had to remember what inorganics were. That's in my mind, that's how I had to remember them. And then you had the organics. Well, as we progress through time, right now we have hybrids.
Right.
And we both know that, you know, that the companies again were coming out with pigments and moving forward, and these pigments started to get more and more concentrated, like Tina Davies and Permablend started upping their game with the hybrids, and LI came out with like loaded, right? So we went from pigments that weren't as dense or as saturated, that didn't have as much colorants into it, into these heavily loaded pigments, which then again we could oversaturate.
And the goal of those pigments was to create something more dense so the color would last longer.
Right, exactly. So when we talk about an inorganic, like I said, it's, you know, it's from the ground, right? It's minerals, it's from the ground. And then we've got the organics. The interesting thing now, because I was just able to spend some time at the Permablend lab and work with the scientists.
Yes,
Oh
that
my
must have been
God.
so exciting.
Oh, my head was exploding. I'm like, oh my God. I don't even remember. I threw so many questions at them. I think they were like, oh my God, can you take that girl home? But now the hybrids kind of go into the organic category as just as far as classifications, right? So we kind of put those in there. And there's things that stand out in each class, right? Like the inorganics, the molecules are a little bit larger. It's harder to.
Right. So I don't know if people might not know, but an inorganic pigment is an iron oxide pigment.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So people might not know that.
Yep, I agree.
And then an organic pigment is a carbon pigment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's talk about those molecules and how they're formulated.
Yeah, so the inorganic tend to be larger. They tend to be
That's right.
A little bit more difficult to implant, right? They don't last as long in the skin. So this is where you're looking at a pigment that is going to last 1 to 2 years approximately. What are some other characteristics?
They have a larger particle. They're less reflective.
Yep. They're more opaque. Yep.
So, and they're more earthy, you know, they they're great for someone who is learning, for someone
Yeah,
who is new to PMU because they're more forgiving and they will help you understand your depth when you're working, whether it be manual or machine work.
right, right. And
So
we all
I
heard that
feel
in
like,
the industry, right? We all heard
yeah,
I think the industry kind of scared the bejesus out of the new people. I've got my notes here too that I'm looking at, so I don't forget anything that I
me
wanted to
too.
tell you guys. But all you heard from the industry was, oh my gosh, if you're new, don't use a hybrid or don't use an organic. You know, they're not forgiving. Permablend's not forgiving. Tina Davies isn't forgiving. Loaded isn't forgiving, you know, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think people got scared, artists got scared, but again, it goes back to what we said. The pigments were advancing and we didn't understand that advancement. So we weren't adjusting our techniques, our depth, our saturation levels, all that kind of stuff. So it was the change in the pigments, but it wasn't the fault of the pigments, if that's how I want to say it. You know,
Yeah, I
there
think
wasn't a
it,
connection.
it came in hard, it came in fast, and
Yeah,
people jumped on it, but there was no, no one really spent a lot of time testing it. I mean,
right.
they spent time testing making it, but no one, like, there wasn't like a 1 year study or a 2 year study. There was no progression as to, well, what's going to happen? Like, can I just use this the same way I used my other pigments? So people
Right.
are just changing so fast that they weren't understanding the difference on how they were made. They were just hearing that they're better and they last longer.
Mhm.
Well, when
And
you
because
haven't,
they do
uh,
have a mix of small and large particle sizes, these organic or these hybrids, they were easier to implant. So if you were
mhm,
using the same technique that you were using when you were using an inorganic pigment, yeah, it's easy to oversaturate, right? Because you're using the
totally,
same technique, but you're putting more into the skin, you're saturating it more because it's easier to get in there.
that's right.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so important. We just had a class this morning, right? So it was kind of
Yes.
like pre Zoom. But I think it's so important to understand the pigments and what you're using in the skin. And people ask me all the time, well, what is better, inorganic or organic? Well, there really isn't one that's better than the other one because there's so many variables. If I have nervous Nelly, right? If I have a patient, sorry, I always call them patients because of my medical background. If I have a client, you know, and she's nervous Nelly and she doesn't want it too dark and she doesn't want, you know, it to last forever. And what if she changes her hair color? And, you know, for me, that's a perfect inorganic client,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So,
I agree. Like, I like to, make a decision based on who the client is, what their goals are. If I'm microblading, which I still really love to do in some cases, I like to have an inorganic pigment for that type of work. I
right.
also like to have that type of pigment for mature skin, which I do a lot of. Um, because their skin and the way it takes the pigment, it takes it so quickly that, yeah, I don't need to work as hard to get it in, but it takes it in.
Yeah, absolutely. It can take it in and it can take it in so fast that if you oversaturate some of those mature clients or those sun damaged clients, or boy, all of a sudden you're like, that pigment's in there. I totally agree with you. And then, so then the other side of that, right? My cat is messing with my computer. Can you see it moving? My cat has to be in every video, I swear. So the flip side of that is, you know, I've got somebody that's got great skin, say they're my age. I've worn these eyebrows for a long time. I'm 57 years old. I know that I'm probably not going to change the shape or the color. You know, I'm not going to mess with them a lot. I mean, I'm the perfect candidate for a hybrid or organic
Yeah,
slash hybrid. You know, they're there, you make them darker, I come back and see you in 3.5 years. You know, I'm the perfect candidate for that type of ink, right?
Right. And that's the goal, is to kind of read, well, one, understand your pigments. So you need to know your difference between the two, and which one is going to be suitable for your client and the skin. So a lot of education and a lot of information will come with making an educated decision for your client.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you know what type, whether it be a hybrid or whether it be an iron oxide type of pigment.
Yeah.
Like I said,
Very true.
I do usually, if I'm dealing with mature clients, I'm going to go on the much lighter scale of the organic, or I'm going to choose an iron oxide color,
Mhm.
because I find that it heals so much nicer in their skin.
Right.
But for
Right.
some, and it lasts, like they still get 2 or 3 years out of it.
Mhm.
And like you were saying, someone like yourself, well, your shape is there, you know what you like. Yeah, you just want your brows to be looking good every day for the next 3 years.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. So I think one thing that we talked about today earlier actually is there's so many pigments out there and I see artists jumping, right? Like I just had an artist on the tattoo store and she thought she might want to use Brow Daddy, so she bought the entire pigment. It's $299. It's $300 in the US. And that's great maybe for some artists, but this was a brand new student and then didn't know what to do with it and wasn't getting the results she wanted. Well, even if you stay within the same company, okay, so like just Permablend, because that's what I
Yeah.
know, because I'm a distributor, right? Full disclosure. You have Brow Daddy and you have Tina Davies and you
Yeah.
have Even Flow and they're all formulated differently.
Right.
And they Permablend can't let one be exactly the same as the other, right? They can't all sell the same thing. That's not
No.
how it works. So they're all different. So I always tell my students, start with a small kit. Start with like 5 brow colors, whether it's with LI or whether it's with Even Flow, and really learn those colors and learn when to use that organic or hybrid and learn when to use that inorganic, and don't get caught into all of these pigments and all of these choices, because it's impossible to learn them all. And there's a slight variance to all of them. They have different amounts of colorants. They have different amounts of excipients or carriers or binders, whatever you want to call them. They're all a little bit different. So they're going to react a little bit different in the skin as well.
One way that the how you can learn what's in your pigment is, well, you just have to read the ingredients. It's like reading ingredients on anything else. All the pigments are going to have CI numbers, and those numbers tell us the color of the pigment that is in that particular color.
Mhm.
So by learning how to read them, you can look up how much of the color is iron oxide and how much of it is carbon based. And those little numbers, it's a CI number, CI, and then it'll be like 77264. It could be yellow, it could be an iron oxide yellow.
Right.
They all have a different number, so it'll tell you, and then you'll start to really understand what colors are in there to make that color.
Mhm. And
So
what's
I
so
think that's super
interesting,
important. And when I learned that, I feel like my knowledge of understanding pigments was at a whole new level.
yeah, I actually have that chart right up here pulled up in front of me. So an organic CI is 11,000 to 74,999. And an inorganic is 77,000 to 79,999. So there are classifications that they fall into. And then, of course, knowing that your white provides your opacity, your black is your longevity, things like that are going to help you. But the other thing interesting to know about that is the brightness, because if you think about an inorganic, again, I think about Sedona and I just think about muted colors, like Sedona is not like bright yellows and bright pinks and bright reds. And, it's all very earthy. It's
It is
natural,
earthy,
right?
yeah.
It's very muted. And when you get into the organics, that's where the brighter yellows, the brighter oranges, the more vibrant colors come in. So if you understand that and you're looking at those CI numbers, either on the label or on that MSDS sheet, and then you look at that pigment and you even do a drawdown if you need to, then you start to see where those numbers all come together and make sense.
That's right. And if they understand the color wheel and how colors, work and how they come together, I sometimes like to say, well, if you look at a couch that sits in a window and the sun shines on it all day, watch how that couch fades. Watch how those colors start to fade. And what are you left with?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is something that's so useful. I'm going to remember that, because I think the other thing that artists think is, when a color fades, right? Like if somebody comes back 2 years or 2.5 years and the color has faded, it doesn't mean that there's not pigment, that there's not particles in the skin. It means that the UV rays have had an effect on the pigments,
That's
just
right.
like your couch, right?
Yep,
Oh my
it
gosh,
has,
that's like
yeah.
a perfect example.
So take like a green couch from the 70s that has red and yellow flowers,
Like the one in my sunroom.
and then all the flowers are outlined in black. Okay, so you've got all the colors you need, and now think about how it's going to fade,
Right,
how that couch is going to fade, and how those
right.
colors are going to change. I
Exactly.
always like to use that as an analogy if I'm, talking to students or, trying to explain to someone how they understand the whole color wheel and the fading process and how it fades, within our skin. And I mean, so many factors play a role, the environment, how much I live in Canada. I don't get as much sun as people in Arizona.
Right, right.
So I'm probably not going to fade as much.
Yeah, well,
We wear toques in the winter here.
that's a great analogy. And, I think it's the first person, right? Like, I love virgin skin. We all love virgin skin. Like, if we're all honest, right? Like, corrections and touch-ups, they're just not as much fun as virgin skin. But it's so important to understand those pigments and know what you're putting in there the very first time, because that's what it fades back to,
That's
right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
so like if I tattoo a client and I use an organic hybrid, it's a client like me, like I've described. I'm going to see them in 3.5 years. I know what shape, color they want, and they come back and they're just a little bit ashy. Now my skin tones or my undertones or a lot of that stuff that we learn aren't quite as important, because now I'm looking at the color, right? I'm looking
Right.
because I tend to ash out. I'm cool. I just tend to ash out.
It
So,
is what it is. There's no
it's
perfection.
important. It is, right? Like I can't change who I am. But it's
No.
important that like my daughter just came in. So my daughter's like me, right? So she went just a bit ashy. It's just biologically who we are. So I had used mallard on her the first time, and she came back in and I used mocha on her, which is
Yeah.
an even flow color. And it was beautiful, and it went brown again. And I think people need to understand that. Like, I've seen people take vials of pigment and you drop in a pigment and then you drop in another color and poof, you have brown, right?
Yeah.
So you need,
There
again,
it is.
you need to understand your colors to do the initial work. You need to understand them to do your touch up. The one thing I think that artists need to understand is if you start with an inorganic, you can cover it with a hybrid, but you're
Yes.
not going to have luck really going the other way. And
You're
that's
not.
another reason, right, to maybe use that inorganic if you're not so sure initially.
Absolutely. Like, I remember, after having my brows done the first few times, they definitely were a little more salmony on the salmon side. And then I went to more of an organic color the next few times, and it's just stayed. Like I feel like mine just kind of fade. Like they don't go ashy, they don't go salmony, they just kind of fade where they just need a boost. So I'm lucky in the fact that I can really just use that same color.
Yeah. Yeah, you're very lucky.
I
And
don't
the
need
bottom
to
line is you got the
modify
right
it too
color.
much.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't need to really modify it too much, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but sometimes, you know, like if they're dealing with someone who's, you know, more on the fair side like yourself, yeah, you might need to make a few adjustments
Hmm.
at a second touch-up appointment if it's been, you know, 2 or 3 years.
Right. And the other thing, this just dawned on me as we're talking, and this is why I love these share the knowledge pieces, is we talked about how pigments change so quickly, right? And I was used to mixing my own, and then we went to some pre-mixed pigments. And now we have these hybrids or these pre-modified pigments. And what I see people doing, Shannon, is putting like 3 or 4 colors together. So we didn't really talk about light fastness yet, but that's one of the reasons why you don't want to take these new pigments and put them all together. My granddaughter loves Peppa Pig and she likes to step in muddy puddles. And so that's what I call it. It's a muddy puddle. You've just put all kinds of colors together, organic, inorganic, you don't know what you're going to have because light fastness means that each colorant is assigned a number, and there's a blue wool scale that you can go from like
That's
1 to
right.
8 or 0 to 8. And 8 lasts the longest, right? So if I use a red and an orange and let's see, red, no, I'm sorry, red, yellow, and black to make my brown. I want the
Okay,
light fastness of those 3 colors to be about the same, right? Because if my
that's right.
black leaves, I've got red and yellow. So now I have salmon brows, orange
That's
brows.
right. Yeah.
If the red leaves, you've got purplish, kind of bluish brows. So it's so important when these pigments are being made. These companies have now recognized that if you want a brown to fade to a softer brown, all of those colors have to fade together.
That's right. They have to fade seamlessly, right? They have to, you know, the light fastness of a yellow, it needs to be higher, and um, you don't want, if you have a light fastness of a yellow in your pigments that's on the lower end, that's not always a good thing. Like you're saying, they should all be along the same lines, and your
Right.
CI number will tell you that. So they fade seamlessly together. I always tell my clients that,
Yeah,
the
because I
color should
couldn't.
just fade seamless. So you have a choice. Your choice can be to maintain it in a few years, or if you don't and you have the shape you like and you decide to put on a pencil, that is should be an option too. It shouldn't be something that looks, out of place. And I say the same thing as when you first get your brows done. People should be like, "Oh my god, you got your brows done." It should be like, "There's something different about them, but I can't quite figure out what it is."
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that because I think I said it wrong. Like they don't have to all have the same number
Right.
because certain pigments, certain colors last longer than other colors. So you're right the way you said it. They have to be put together so it's seamless. So when it fades into a lighter version of itself. And when you
Right.
start mixing all of those colors, then you're mixing all of those things and you don't know what the outcome's going to be, and they come back for a touch up and you don't know what to add more of or what to take away because you have a muddy puddle.
You have a muddy puddle. Yeah. Sometimes I like to say, sometimes if I have, a certain client, I like to have like a base color, like say, you're talking about mocha by Eden Flow. Okay, it's a great color. I really like to use that color. And then someone comes back and they just needs a little pop. So I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm gonna use that mocha, but I'm maybe gonna add a couple drops of hazel because they just need
Right.
a little more richness in there.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at that particular brand, or you were saying take 5 colors and get to know them,
Mhm.
adding a little bit of intensity, um, by 1 or 2, like I would say 2 to 3 drops is a good intensity.
Right.
You write it down, you keep notes, then you know exactly what you're going to be left with.
Right, because you do see experienced artists mixing things together and their
Yeah.
muddy puddles turn out okay. but they understand what they've mixed together. They know that pigment. They've looked at the MSDS. They know what organic, what inorganic they have in there. And it's the same thing, like you just said, you know, if I'm going to use mocha, you know, then I'm probably going to, if I'm going to change the intensity or the density of that, I'm going to use something within that brand, within that kit, to either go lighter or darker or more intense or less intense, because those are formulated to work together. They have the same excipients, the same binders, this, you know, so it makes sense to do it that way, like the hazel and the mocha,
Yes.
like you suggested. You know, you definitely don't want to do like an even flow mocha with a, I don't know, Li aqua pigment,
Yeah,
because
I wouldn't. No, that's
no,
not how pigments were made to be used anyways. And I don't think that the manufacturers of these pigments would appreciate that either, right? They have
right.
their own way that they've developed these and made these to
Yeah.
sustain the longevity of their own brands so that we can use them correctly. So
Yeah.
we also have to be able to use them correctly, but we have to be educated and, working with, senior artists like yourself is a great way to learn, like, saying, okay, well, I'm new, but how do I pick colors? What do I do?
Right.
And getting those 5 colors and studying them and understanding them and knowing them well. And
Mhm.
then you can, step into a couple more colors
Yeah,
and
because
start
I
to
even tell
understand.
students to go as far as, if they have a thinning solution or if they have a solution, a diluting solution,
Right.
to use the solution that's made by the brand of ink you're using. Because, for example, some of them are more glycerin based, some of them are more witch hazel
That's
based, some
right.
of them are more. So if you're going to dilute that pigment, you should dilute it with what the pigment itself is made of, instead of
100%.
introducing something different.
Speaking of dilution, for people who maybe aren't as seasoned artists, adding a little dilution to the organic pigments is a great idea, because what diluting that pigment does is it just takes the intensity of the color down.
Right.
So you're all you're doing is just adjusting the color,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's a great way to, if you're nervous, to take baby steps into the organic ranges, adding just a couple drops, because
Right.
then you won't oversaturate as
Mhm.
much.
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah, there's so many tricks to the trade and there's so much to learn. And I think, you know, I had to take a step back. I spent $40,000 getting my business up and running. You've heard my story. You know, my first machine, I bought a Nouveau Contour because I had a medical button on it. And I'm like, I'm from the medical field. I'm going to be the best medical tattoo artist ever. You know, little did I know it was adjusting my voltage. But I bought it, $3,500, you know, and
That's crazy today to think that
oh
you
my
spent
gosh. I know people,
$3,500
when
on a
artists
machine.
go, machines are so expensive. I'm like, no, they're not. My cartridges were 12 to $15
And I
a
was gonna like,
piece.
and then you get only those cartridges from Nuvo. Like it's
Exactly. Yeah. But I had to take a step back. What I personally did is I started working with a body artist and I started studying tattooing and the science of tattooing. And I think if you're an artist and you're out there and you're scrambling and you're looking at your pigments and you've got 50 of them and you've got 10 different brands, and you know, this person that bought these Brow Daddy, she used them twice and was very upset because she didn't get any retention and thought it was the brand.
right.
And it wasn't. It, you know, it was, she needed to adjust to use that brand because it was different than the brand she was using before. So I think if you are struggling, or if you're an artist that like changed everything, right? You didn't know what was going wrong. So you changed cartridges and machines and voltages and pigments and all of this stuff. I think when it comes to the pigments, take a step back, pick out your favorite colors, look up the MSDS sheets, do the drawdowns, learn those pigments, know, are they organic, inorganic, you know, and just start smaller and use fewer and get to know them and start to monitor your results. And like you said, document everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always, document even to this day, like, what, I've used, and maybe it was just 2 drops of this, but the main color was this. And I don't veer from brand to brand. Right now I like Even Flow, and I like Tina Davies, and those are the ones that I work with. I don't cross over between those two. So I'm either Yesterday I did a brow, and I picked Tina Davies medium brown and a couple drops of the dark brown.
Mhm.
And then the lady before her, I picked mocha with hazel.
Right.
So I don't like mix the two brands together. I stick within them.
I'm going to shut
But
my
I've used
sliding glass
both
door
now.
quick.
Keep going.
Okay.
I've used both of those brands now for quite a while,
Right.
that I'm comfortable to do that. And I've seen enough healed results that I can see, where my clients' needs are, and I take that into account.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Because they're
have,
all different, right?
yeah, I have a ton of pigments, but I test pigments. So my story is a little bit different. But if I was an artist, I could say I probably could use 7 or 8 eyebrow pigments and do almost every one of my clients, because we're all in different geographical areas, right? Like I'm primarily fits 2 or 3, maybe a 4
Right.
once in a while. I mean, so I never have to cover the full spectrum. I never have to, I barely ever do 1s. I barely ever do 6s, so yeah, a handful is what you really need, I think, to really do it over and over and over again. So, and there's so
Yeah,
many other things, right? But those are for different share the knowledge sessions. Because
absolutely.
there's so many things other than skin. There's, your machine, your technique, there's aftercare. There's so many other things, but I think, pigments are a place that you have to start and you have to learn them. We mentioned this earlier too in class, that the the manufacturers are starting to give us this knowledge.
Right.
They didn't know we wanted it. We didn't know we needed it. So I felt like there was a disconnect there between the artists and the manufacturers. But now, like on the new Luxe brand, the information that comes with it, I mean, I think Tina Davies paved the way, right? She came out with her pigments, and her charts were like, oh my
Yeah.
God, this is who I use it for. This is what it is. This is what it covers. It's like, Tina, you're a god. And I know
Yeah.
Tina personally. So I can say this. I've had these conversations with her. But now, like the Luxe brand, and I'm sure, the other brands are following the same suit. There's even a chart on there to tell you how warm or cool it is. So if you're looking at a client and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if they're warm, I don't really know if they're cool, you can go to that
Neutral.
neutral pigment. Yep, exactly. Because that information is so available to us now, that once we start to learn and understand these pigments, it's like, oh my God, it's right there.
Yeah, it's getting so much better. I mean, the
Mm.
information that we're getting from manufacturers is helping us be better artists. It's helping us teach people better as well. Like, I think, like nobody ever taught me what a CI number was. Like,
Right.
nobody ever. They're
Yeah.
just like, use this color, use this pigment, use this. And you're just like, oh. And then, yeah, you end up with salmon and green brows,
Yeah.
and you learn from it. So yeah, the new Lux by Permablend, in case people don't know, is EU, European Union approved. So some guidelines came in January of
Right.
this year, that required the pigments and how they are made. So pigments are made out of powder, had to meet certain specifications in order to be approved in Europe.
Yeah.
So that's the new Lux line by Permablend, which is, like they said, EU certified. So I've heard that, yeah, the information on those lines that has come out with them is really good.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. And I do want people to know, because I get asked this all the time, if you are in the US and you're using pigments that are not EU approved, they're safe. They're safe.
100% safe.
100% they're safe. So,
Yeah. So
you know,
it's only a few countries in the European Union that I think really cracked down on it. I believe Italy was one of them. And I think Spain might have been the other.
yeah.
But I know Italy was a big one. And keep in mind, like those two countries also have very different specs on wine. Any wine that comes out of those countries, the specifications are different. So they have a lot of regulations that they like to follow.
Yeah.
So there is absolutely nothing wrong with the pigments that are made here that are for North America at all. They are fantastic and amazing.
Right. I absolutely agree. And coming, into this industry as a radiation therapist and working with cancer patients for 30 years, I have researched and researched and researched, chemicals and cancer causing. And yeah, they're safe. So
They're 100%
you
safe.
can use either one. It's just certain countries have certain rules, right? Just like the FDA. It has certain rules. There's certain things that
there's things we can't get in Canada that you guys can get in the US. Why, we don't know.
Exactly.
It's honestly, we can like say a skincare cream by Olay. Well, the same exact jar in the US might have different ingredients than the exact same jar in Canada, because we might require something different. It doesn't mean that one's better than the other. They just might perform a little differently in terms of how your skin will take it, absorption or whatever. So that is like your products are way better down there. So next time I'm down there,
stock up on some stuff.
I should stock up on some things because they change the ingredients when they come to Canada.
I know. Well, hopefully I'll see you this summer, right? In South Dakota is what I'm hoping.
Yes, that's the goal.
Yeah. So I think to kind of wrap this up so it doesn't get too long for people, we talked today about inorganics, which,
iron oxides.
Yep. Iron oxides, Sedona, Arizona. If you haven't been there, you need to go. It's beautiful. It's warm. It's red rock. It's orange rock. It's very muted. And then we have organics, the carbons, and those are bright yellows and oranges, like brighter colors, right? Smaller molecules. We mentioned the size difference for the molecules. The iron oxides, you're looking at a 12 to 18 month lifespan, probably 2 to 3 years for organics or hybrids, right? Because we mentioned that the hybrids are over in the organic category. The implanting them, it's going to take a little bit more work with the inorganics because of the molecule size versus the organics or the hybrid.
They'll go in really nicely.
Yep. And we talked about, like mature skin or, sun damaged skin, or somebody that's just not sure, somebody who, maybe wants to change the shape of their brows after a few years, or a different color. That's a person for inorganics, where somebody like me, I just want this for the rest of my life. I'm done. I'm a good organic hybrid.
It's funny you talk about that. I had a client who was kind of like a ashy blonde highlights. She decided to let her gray come in. So, I can't remember the exact color I used on her the first time. But when I looked at her, I was like, I know exactly what to do. I am going to mix ash gray and blonde by Teeny Davies.
Yeah.
Because that is going to blend seamlessly, because she had some blondish still in there.
Right.
But she's letting all the grays come out, and it was a nice transition.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is exactly what she needs. And she literally messaged me a week later and goes, I can't believe the color is so perfect.
Yeah, that's so fantastic, because we do change as we age. We tend to get a little bit more cooler. We do change. We are going to make some modifications or some changes in the pigments that we use. I mean, I'm tattooing people 10 plus years now, right? So I'm making changes as they age, and they change. So yeah, it's really important to understand your inorganic, your organic, and your hybrid, and to really have a good idea of when you want to use them. And we'll do more share the knowledge when because we can get into different techniques, then different needles,
Absolutely.
all that kind of
Toners,
stuff.
correctors, that's a whole nother one.
That's a whole nother one.
I love
So,
toners and correctors.
yes, well, we can do one of those together then too, because that's a whole nother one. And I love
Yeah, but
talking about
getting
that
the knowledge and the information, that's a really great step. And being able to make sure that your clients, you know, fading, like we were talking about, is seamless with the color selection that they choose.
Yeah. And I think one last thing that I know I want to say is, you know, just be careful where you get your information from. Social media, the internet, you know, it's great, but we used to have cancer patients come into our facility and they were diagnosed with, you know, a breast cancer, and they would, oh, I can hear somebody in the background. Can you?
Yeah, it's my computer.
Oh.
Someone outside now.
Oh, okay. So we'll wrap it up here, but they would get a breast cancer diagnosis and they would go to the internet and they would come in and they would think that they were dying. They had convinced themselves they were dying, and they had an in situ carcinoma, which was super early stage, 100% curable, but they went to the internet, so they thought that they were dying. And it's kind of the same thing with PMU, right? People go to the internet and they see something or they read something and they repeat it. And there may not be any scientific basis to it whatsoever, but they saw it, so they believe it to be true. So they repeat it. So I think it's so important to find that mentor or find that leader and learn really science-based information.
Or group.
Or PMU Collaborative. So
yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was a great chat, and I hope
thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope that this session helps out a lot of people. I'll put it together and I'll get it posted, and it'll be on our YouTube channel, Micro PMU it's Micro PMU Tattoo Supply and PMU Collaborative. It'll be on our YouTube channel. I'll post it in some groups. It'll be on the blog. So yeah, we'll
fantastic.
Try and get that information out there. So
yeah, and you guys can reach out to us if you have any questions.
Yep. Yeah, perfect. All right.
Bye. Okay, bye.